You're listening to Release Your Resistance with Bex Beltran, episode 97. Welcome to Release Your Resistance. This is Bex. The only reason why any of us don't have what we want in life is because of our own resistance. Right now, I'm learning how to recognize and release my resistance, and this podcast tells you how you can release your resistance so that you can live the exact life that you want. Let's get started. We have a guest on the podcast this week. Last week, I shared some ideas for favorite gifts to give and ways to treat yourself. And one of the gifts you can give to someone else or yourself is a service that can make your life better. So today I want you to meet Dr. Jinan Banna. She is an associate professor in the nutrition field at the University of Hawaii, and she is also a registered dietitian. Let's go to the interview. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to hear everything that you have to share.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, definitely. My pleasure. And I just gave a brief introduction as I introduced today's episode, but I know you can introduce yourself and what you do so much better than I did. So would you share what you do and why?
Sure. I'm an associate professor at the University of Hawaii, and I teach classes there in basic nutrition and community nutrition, among others. I also do research on obesity prevention and nutrition education. And I also own my own nutrition consulting business. And through my business, I do coaching one-on-one and also in groups. And I have a blog through which I offer free information on healthy eating and weight loss.
Nice. Wow. It sounds like you're pretty busy. Oh, I love it. And what about specifically for this time of year? So I have a theory, which I kind of mentioned to you last week, I think it was, where I think that as people enter this time of year, this busy holiday season, that they either actively or maybe just subconsciously decide that being intentional about their eating and nutrition is either too difficult or it's not fun or it's not the right timing because of the holidays or because of the gathering. So what's your opinion on that theory?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I hear that a lot as well, that people really are not looking forward to eating healthy and they think it's really boring. And I think that we really need to reframe our thinking around this and really realize that it's still okay to eat what you love. And we just need to keep in mind the basic principles of healthy eating as we're working toward weight loss and improving our diet. So those basic principles, for example, would be the balance between all of the food groups, making sure you're getting in some protein, something from the grain group, fruits and vegetables, dairy, and having that balance between all the groups and knowing that it's okay if you want to have a treat, if you want to have some sweets or a food that's high in saturated fat, and that is fine and can fit in your diet. And keeping in mind also that principle of moderation, so not getting too much in the way of saturated fat, sugar, sodium, really keeping those under control, but knowing that once again, it's okay to eat different foods that may be high in saturated fat, sugar, and sodium. And then also keeping in mind getting all of the nutrients that we need. So that principle of adequacy and getting enough of what we need. And the principle of variety, so eating different foods in each of the food groups. And I think we just need to keep in mind that it's okay to enjoy our food, that our food should always be enjoyable, and we can have a piece of pie or some steak, and that's okay. There's no problem. And that idea of balance is really so important.
I love that. When you say diet, are you speaking from your nutritionist, academia brain and talking about the variety of food that we eat, or are you talking about what many of us outside of the health industry say when we say diet, which is like a restrictive plan? Or how do we combine the two meanings, or are there two meanings?
Sure. When I use the word diet, I'm talking generally about what we eat. So I'm not referring to the way we might often hear the word diet in the media. So thinking more about fad diets. They may be very restrictive plans that involve cutting out whole food group, for example. So I use that term just to refer to what we eat.
Mm-hmm. When I think of myself, in previous times of my life, when I've wanted to change my eating habits and wanted to be very intentional about it and heard the benefit of the variety, I felt like, but I don't know. Like, I don't know what to eat to give myself that nutritional variety. Or when you say, for example, grains, to me, I'm just like, isn't that just bread? But maybe that's not. So what if someone doesn't have a foundation already? What could they do to get the things that you're describing, the variety, the nutrition, all these things that can be so helpful and not make us feel restricted?
Great question. I would highly recommend visiting myplate.gov. That is a super helpful resource and gives you a foundation in those basic principles and breaks down what foods are included in each of the food groups. So you can see what are some examples of grains, for example, what are examples of whole grains, which we should be emphasizing in that food group. And you can get an idea of the principle of variety by looking at some of the different foods in each group. And the idea being that we should be eating different foods in each of the groups, because of course all of the foods give us different nutrients, and it's important to help us eat everything we need to eat different foods.
What do you think we should do about the thought or the suggestion that eating some types of foods or too much of a type of food is cheating?
Great question. I get this question a lot. Is it okay to cheat? And I think what we need to do is really reframe our thinking around healthy eating. And if we're considering cheating to be having a candy bar, instead of thinking about it as cheating, we need to think about it in terms of being able to enjoy a candy bar and that being okay, because of course there's this principle of moderation that we use when we're thinking about a healthy diet, and that means that we don't eat to excess. So if we have a candy bar, we can think about it in the context of our diet for the day. Have we had a lot of other sweets? In that case, maybe we would want to choose something other than the candy bar. But if we haven't had any added sugar that day, if we've had very little in the way of dessert, it can be perfectly fine to have the candy bar. We just need to think about always maintaining that balance between the different food groups and not overdoing it when it comes to sweets, for example, if that's the way you quote unquote cheat. So it's all about reframing the mindset around it and knowing that healthy eating is really enjoying your food, and you have to include foods that you enjoy, such as the candy bar, to have a sustainable diet.
Have you found that sometimes people don't actually enjoy the candy bar? They just feel like a pull to it, or marketing is just very effective, or maybe it's something that they enjoyed as a child, but now when they really stop and slow down and while they're eating it, they're like, this is kind of gross. Have you ever found that with any of your clients?
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And I think when we start to change our habits a bit, we do develop preferences for different foods. So we might find that as we switch to eating perhaps more fruit as a dessert, or maybe we try some dried fruit because it's really sweet and gives us that excitement of eating something that seems like a dessert after our meal, we might no longer find as much satisfaction in eating the candy bar. And so I think that's something we can think about as a potential benefit of incorporating lots of different healthy foods in our diet, that perhaps our preferences will shift a bit away from these super sweet foods, for example.
Yeah.
But if you still enjoy the candy bar, then once again, it's completely fine to include it as a part of your diet.
Okay, that's good to hear. So that some people who might have been down on themselves and, kind of berating themselves or blaming themselves for quote unquote cheating, if you eat it intentionally and as part of a balance, why call it cheating? Like, why even introduce that vocabulary?
That's right. I think that idea of cheating is really detrimental when we're thinking about weight loss and sustainable healthy eating, because what happens is that cheating makes us feel guilty. And when we feel guilty, we might feel like we've failed, and we then feel like, why bother? And we can just go have another candy bar because it doesn't matter now when we're off the diet. And we get in a cycle of being quote unquote good and then quote unquote bad. And it's not helpful in terms of helping us meet our goals.
Yeah. When you work with your clients and you hear them bringing up any kind of language or mindsets around what you just described, the good versus the bad. How do you help them, or what advice do you have for people who are now self-recognizing this? Like, oh, I do classify myself as good when I do this, but bad when I do that. How can we think about that differently?
I reassure them that really it's okay. I let them know that we really shouldn't be making judgments about eating, and it's really all a matter of just keeping the basic principles in mind. So it's just a question of remembering that principle of moderation when we're thinking about eating particular foods, and instead of calling it cheating, calling it having a food I enjoy and thinking about how that food fits in the rest of my diet. There's also a phrase that I've heard a colleague use that I find to be really smart in terms of enjoying our food with health in mind. I think that's really excellent. Melissa Joy Dobbins uses this phrase, and I find it really smart because that's really what we should be doing. We should be enjoying our food. It's a pleasure of life, and it's really important.
Yes, I love to hear that. And I love that you're bringing in this idea of, yeah, I want this. I enjoy this. I want this. So I'm going to do it in a very intentional and intelligent way, not just go crazy and not manage my mind and my thoughts around it.
Definitely. And it's all about being mindful, really being aware of what we're eating, not eating mindlessly, taking time to eat, and just having an awareness.
So if someone's listening right now and they're thinking, all right, it all sounds good in theory, I can handle this all while I'm, here on my walk or here driving or whatever someone is doing while they're listening to this episode. But 2 weeks from now or a month from now, they know they're going to be at a family gathering or a holiday party, and everyone's bringing out their best stuff, the best stuff that they only bring out once a year, or they walk into the grocery store and the favorite things are there that aren't usually there the rest of the year. I can imagine that someone's thinking that's going to take a lot of willpower. I hear you saying mindful eating and intentionality and balance and moderation. I can almost hear people's brains resisting. And, this whole podcast is about resistance. So what would you say? Do you recognize that kind of resistance in your clients or in yourself about other topics? Or what can we do with this resistance to this great advice that you're giving us right now?
Great question. Yes, I definitely notice resistance. And I think it sometimes comes up when things are new. With new tasks, we sometimes resist. An example might be a client who really doesn't eat any vegetables and wants to start incorporating those. And this resistance can come up, I think, because sometimes we don't know how to break things down into smaller goals and do things one at a time. So perhaps a first step when we're trying to incorporate more vegetables would be to identify some vegetables that we like or might like, and then determine an easy way to prepare the vegetables, determine when we can prepare the vegetables, how that fits in our schedule, if we have the tools to prepare them, if we're able to purchase them, when we are able to purchase them, and then make a plan to prepare them. And that's one thing that I think comes up when we're thinking about resistance, breaking things down into smaller goals and then doing things one at a time. And then I think another thing that comes up would be perfectionist tendencies. And I know that some people want to be sure they have it all figured out and that it's perfect before they actually take the action. So I think it's important just to take small, imperfect actions towards eating the vegetables, for example.
Yeah, those are such good examples because I agree with you. I think when our brains think, oh, I'm going to do what Dr. Jinan is saying here, and I'm going to, use moderation and think mindfully about what I eat and eat in a whole and healthy way. But then they think that means I have to eat vegetables and I hate vegetables. And also I don't even have a garden or a farm to go to. And, if we can just say, okay, hold on. You don't have to eat all the vegetables. Just eat one. Start with one. So what is your favorite vegetable?
Most recently, I guess I've really enjoyed asparagus. I had it as part of a salad that someone served recently, and it was really quite delicious.
Do you know how was it prepared? Was it like roasted or sauteed or grilled?
I think it was roasted, and it was really just so tasty. So I think that's at the top of my list. But there's so many others that I love: Brussels sprouts, broccoli. The list is really endless.
Yes. See, and this is the other thing too. I think when people think about vegetables as a category, if they've ever had any resistance to vegetables, they just think, blah, no thanks. But when we start talking about individual vegetables and how they are prepared and why we like them, suddenly it sounds a little bit more interesting. And suddenly our brains can say, oh, wait, you had that in a salad and it was roasted? How was that? Like, ooh, now I'm very curious. What kind of dressing was that? Was there, what went along with it? Now I'm very interested in this, that maybe a minute ago, my brain was giving me the turn it off sign, like no more talk about vegetables. But when you mentioned Brussels sprouts too, my husband and I recently started making Brussels sprouts, and it's like our favorite thing now. Okay, the other thing that you said about imperfection or allowing to be imperfect. So what would be an example of someone who's feeling like it needs to be perfect? And then what would your imperfect solution be for them?
I think it goes right along with what you were saying in terms of perhaps thinking that things are not working out because you're not consuming the several cups of vegetables you should be consuming per day, and feeling like a failure because you're just not living up to that perfect standard. And I think I would give the advice along the lines of what you mentioned, which is to start with one vegetable, see if you can incorporate it. If you're not able to meet your goal for the day, that's okay. Just keep trying to assess your situation and think about the resources you have on hand, the time available, how eating the vegetables fits in with your life, and little by little incorporate more and more and try different vegetables, try different ways of preparing them, and see how it goes. So just really being kind and gentle with yourself is very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that goes for every new habit in our lives that we know will be beneficial to us, that we want to incorporate, but that our brain is resisting. Just be gentle with ourselves, let ourselves experiment, take it slow, start small. I definitely think that's the way to go. So have you overcome, or are you overcoming any resistance?
Yes, I think I do often find resistance when it comes to me personally. And I find resistance when I have to do something that is completely new and perhaps requires several different steps that I have never done. And sometimes they can be really simple things, for example, in my business, if I'm going to do a giveaway, that requires several steps. I need to identify the prizes, determine how to do the drawing, figure out how to do the advertising for the giveaway. And these are not complicated things, but they're new things. And I think doing something new can always be challenging. And so I find that I have to take imperfect action. And that's really what I tell my clients as well. I think that's the only way we can progress when we're doing something new, is to realize that we don't have to be perfect. We can make a mistake and we just need to do it.
I'm so grateful that you shared that personal example, because I think so often, especially when we're doing something that we have done many times, or it is our area of expertise based on our, background and our education and everything, it can look so effortless to someone who hasn't done it yet. But when you open up and you say, yeah, I can talk to you all day long about vegetables, but let's not talk about doing a giveaway. I think it's very helpful to remind us all, like, oh yeah, someone else might be sitting and listening. I don't know the first thing about cooking vegetables, but I can tell you about doing giveaways all day long. And it just helps to remind us that we all can learn just by doing what you said.
That's right. I think we need to just push past it and be imperfect and see what happens. And oftentimes we'll find that there's a great result, even though we perceive an imperfect action.
Totally. I mean, sometimes my brain is so sure of exactly what's going to happen, and then it was so wrong, And then I think, wow, I did not expect that outcome. I was sure it wasn't going to work, or I wouldn't like it, or people wouldn't like it. And here I was totally wrong. Imagine that. Yeah. So good. Any other tips or thoughts or ideas that you can offer to us as we're going into the holiday season? And also maybe ideas that we can use year round, even when we're not in this time of high temptation?
And the first tip I would offer is to enjoy yourself. So yes, I would say, we can reframe our thinking perhaps around temptation and think of it more as really having a pleasurable sensory experience when it comes to being surrounded by all this wonderful food, and just truly enjoy it, I think, is the first word of advice. And I would say that we want to always keep those principles I mentioned in mind. So when you're looking at your plate, think about whether your plate is balanced, whether you have some vegetables on your plate. I know that's often a problem area for people. If you're going to have something that includes some grains and some protein, then make sure you also have your fruits and vegetables, perhaps some dairy, and have a balanced plate. I think that's very important to keep in mind. And also making small changes. So you might find that you can make some healthy substitutions in your holiday dishes. So you can think about perhaps replacing one ingredient with another that might be higher in fiber, for example. And then also just being conscious when you're purchasing foods, reading your food labels, reading the ingredients list, and just being aware in general of what you're doing. So not going into the holidays blindly without a good plan, but really always keeping those basic principles in mind.
That's helpful. Part of my resistance about losing weight or managing a healthy diet, or eating intentionally was feeling like when I slipped over the product and started reading the ingredients list, first of all, very fine and small and hard to read print. So then I was just like, oh, never mind, And then secondly, too, so much verbiage that I didn't personally know. And I think until someone just told me, only look at the first 3 ingredients and then just make sure those first 3 ingredients are something that you want. So not sugar. Like you were saying, break it down into small things that you can do even imperfectly. So yeah, I love the tips of looking at your ingredients and looking at your plate. I could even imagine people have, like a mental template that they put over their plate to see, is this well balanced or is it too heavy on one side or the other? Anything else that you would offer or anything that your clients have had a lot of success with?
I think returning to myplate.gov, again, it can be really helpful because you can see the graphic of the plate there. So as you said, we can keep that in mind as we're planning our plate and think about whether our plate is really balanced, and then know the examples of different foods in all the different groups and make sure to get that variety of foods in. So I would definitely have that graphic in mind as you're thinking about what to eat.
I heard when you were talking about making substitutions in recipes, and you said maybe consider substituting something a little bit higher fiber. What would be an example if you know one off of the top of your head?
Sure. I recently gave an example on social media. I gave a quick tip for healthy eating and weight loss, and I talked about the turkey club sandwich. And I mentioned that I don't mind my turkey club sandwich. I enjoy it just as much without the bacon. So I might choose to replace the bacon with avocado, which would add some fiber to my meal and help me stay full to not overeat. That's one example.
As you were talking about the turkey club, I was like, ooh, this sounds delicious. I'm totally all in. And then you said cut the bacon. And I thought, oh no, I don't want to do that. But I could imagine cutting the turkey in half and using less bacon just so that I am still getting the combination of flavor and texture that I want, but without as much maybe.
Yeah, I should say that really it's all about finding what works for you and your preferences. So, if you don't find the sandwich as palatable without the bacon, then, have the bacon by all means. But the idea is to find ways to make small changes that do work for you and that give you a similar pleasure when it comes to eating. So in my particular case, I don't miss the bacon. I don't notice it. And I, love avocado. So that particular change works for me. Seeing if you can make a small change, seeing how it goes, and just keep trying and know what may be a healthier choice in general.
Perfect. And I love that you offered the idea of the avocado too, because I do love avocado on many foods, including on a turkey club. And I would not have identified that as a fiber. I would have identified that as fat, I guess a fat, right?
Fat, right. Yes, there's quite a lot of fat in avocado, and it's a healthy fat. Right. It's also an important component of the diet. So that's another benefit of eating the avocado.
I just want to go through some kind of like fun, get to know you, rapid fire questions. You don't have to answer them quickly if you don't want to, but just to kind of hear a little bit more about you on the personal side, if you're willing.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm a big journaler. Everyone on the podcast listening to the podcast knows I love to talk about journaling. So are you a journal lover, journal curious, a non-journaler?
I don't routinely journal in depth, but I do often write things down that perhaps I'm having trouble processing, and I then return to them and I think about them and use some of the techniques that I've learned along the way in my life that I've learned, for example, in cognitive behavioral therapy. So I think I have found it useful to write things down when things come up for me.
Definitely. That's good. What do you think about people keeping a food journal?
I think that can be useful, especially at the beginning of your journey toward healthier eating or weight loss. And it can be helpful because it helps to gain awareness about what you're eating and take note of whether your diet might match in terms of some of those principles of healthy eating we talked about. So I think particularly at the beginning, and maybe not forever, as I imagine it may become tedious to document what you eat or record it using an app. I wouldn't think that that's generally necessary, for an extended period, but I would say particularly at the beginning when you're changing your habits.
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. Do you have anything that you love to recommend to other people? Not necessarily about your work, but maybe. So like books, TV shows, any special products or places or things that you love to do?
Yes, I love to recommend restaurants. I love to go out to eat. I post a lot about that on social media because I enjoy food so much. I guess it's somewhat related to my work, but I love to tell people where I've been and I love to hear where they've been in terms of restaurants. And then I also love to recommend different food products, I guess also somewhat related to my work, but I do a lot of that on my blog and I love to share about that. And then perhaps books, I also incorporate some of those recommendations into my business. And some of these books might be by Buddhist teachers such as Pema Chodron. I enjoy some of the Buddhist teachings and think that they are helpful generally in terms of navigating life.
Yes. Oh, you're speaking my language. I love everything that you just shared. Yes. What about, do you have any routines or rituals that you follow in your own life that you like to think about or tell other people about?
Yes, I do meditation in the morning and have found that to be really helpful in terms of calming my mind before I start my busy day.
Do you meditate on your own or do you use an app or how do you meditate?
I have been using an app, but usually I use the timer. So it's a countdown to a bell and I sit in silence for my meditation. Sometimes I use a guided meditation as well.
Okay, so more variety, right? Just mix it up, get balance. I love it. That's so good. What about a mantra? Do you have one or more mantras that you say to yourself or to other people?
I have learned one mantra at some of the meditation sessions that I've been to in the past, and it is, may I be happy, may I be well, may I be safe, may I be peaceful and free from suffering. And I found that to be really helpful.
Do you find yourself repeating that to yourself, or do you only say it to yourself at intentional times, or how do you use that mantra?
Sometimes it comes up, especially during meditation. Sometimes I will say that to myself. And I think it's mainly at those times when I use my mantra.
Yeah, well, that's good. And I would imagine, I would be so surprised if this wasn't the case, that little snippets of it probably do enter your mind at different times of the day, like I'm safe or I'm happy, or I would imagine that since you bring it up for yourself during your meditation, it also is there at other times too, maybe just subconsciously.
Yes, I would say particularly when I'm struggling with something, I might bring that to mind to help me calm down a bit. I think it's something that I found useful as I go through various things in life.
Yeah, I like that. And you've mentioned a few times now, so I'm very curious to see them. You've mentioned that you have a blog where you share a lot of your recommendations. You post in social. I'm guessing that's Instagram, or is that somewhere else?
Yes, Instagram and Facebook.
Okay, great. So we'll want to link your blog, your Instagram, your Facebook to the show notes for this episode. And I'm thinking we'll just make it very simple, if you don't mind, and just call the link to this episode, the website, bexby.org/JINAN for your name. Does that work for you?
Great.
Okay, so we'll send everyone to bexby.org/JINAN, and then you can find Dr. Jinan's website with the blog on it, a link to your Instagram, a link to your Facebook. Where else, or what else would you want to point people towards?
I would like people to know that I have a free webinar coming up on November 16th, and it is about how to enjoy your food at restaurants while still losing weight or maintaining a healthy weight. And I think that really gets back to what we've been talking about on this podcast, and that is that I want to help people enjoy their food.
Are you currently taking new clients?
I am, yes. I do work with people one-on-one and also in groups. So on my webinar on November 16th, I'll be talking about my group program for weight loss. And so those are several opportunities to work with me.
Okay, that's wonderful. And for anyone who's now got their curiosity piqued, I will just say I did sign up for your webinar, which is actually going to be next, is it Wednesday?
I believe that is Tuesday.
Okay, yep. So if you're listening to this episode in real time, you can join. It's not too late. You can join the webinar on Tuesday. And it was super easy to sign up, and I got an immediate email response from you. So when you were talking about earlier about trying to figure out how to do the giveaway, I thought, oh, well, she figured out how to create the webinar sign up and get the emails sent out. It was very seamless. And I appreciate that as a consumer when everything just comes and the link comes and it's just super easy. And I got a reminder. So yeah, good job. And also thank you for that.
Thank you. And I had to push through a lot of resistance to accomplish those tasks.
Well, see, we never would have known. You made it look so seamless. So that's perfect. Great. Anything else you want to add or share before we wrap up our episode today?
Just that I think everybody can do it when it comes to weight loss and healthy eating. And once again, just be kind with yourself and take imperfect action every day.
Oh, it's such good advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
What a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And remember that you can get links to everything that we talked about, including Dr. Jinan's webinar for next week, as well as links to her Instagram and Facebook and website. And in case you were curious, I do have a food journal or eating log that you can use if you want to track the food that you're eating and get awareness like we heard about in this episode. You can find that in the Journal and Notebook shop at bexby.org/quickshop, or you can see a link to it from the show notes in this episode at bexby.org/Jinan, Jinan. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk with you again next week. This has been Release Your Resistance. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, think about someone who you know who would love this episode and share it with them. There should be a share button on your app if you're listening to this on your phone. If you'd like to continue this conversation one-on-one or in real time, come visit me on my site at bexby.org to see how we can work together.